G'day, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks so much for joining us once again for another episode of the Big Bad Brad Show MMA. My name is Brad Williams, and every week we aim to give you a fan's eye view of the sport of mixed martial arts from way up the back in the cheap seats. And we have got loads to get through this week. We're going to be talking UFC 200, even more fights announced for this already ridiculous card. We're going to get into that. We're going to be talking Wanderlei Silva. We're going to be talking Rampage. We're going to be talking the injury bug striking once again and knocking out a UFC headliner for the second time in 2 weeks. But we're going to kick things off right now with some World Series of Fighting news, and UFC veteran John Fitch last weekend became the new World Series of Fighting welterweight champion. He picked up a win over fellow UFC vet João Zeferino. It was for the vacant title, a title that was vacated when former World Series of Fighting welterweight champion Rousimar Palhares was suspended for 2 years for refusing to let go of a submission that he had on Jake Shields. God bless his little cotton socks. He just can't wrap his head around that, when your opponent taps, let him go rule. I know. There's a lot to remember. When do you let him go? When they tap. It's not that complicated, but we do have a new World Series of Fighting welterweight champion. It was announced after that fight by World Series of Fighting President Ray Sefo that John Fitch's first title defense could be, or will most likely be, against fellow UFC veteran Jake Shields in what could potentially be the most boring fight ever captured on film. And I mean, no disrespect to either fighter, but they're both infamous for not having the most fan-friendly style. Although they might cancel each other out. They're both very grappling heavy. They're both world-class grapplers. So maybe they'll cancel each other out and they'll have a slugfest for the ages and we'll all be pleasantly surprised. But a massive congratulations to John Fitch. Finally a major champion, one of the best welterweight fighters in the world for a very, very long time and very well deserved. Also, great news this week was the announcement of the return of Quinton Rampage Jackson to Bellator. Of course, he was contracted to Bellator, made a brief return to the UFC. There was some contract funny business going on, but they've managed to get that sorted. Rampage will be back in the cage at Bellator Dynamite 2. He'll be taking on Olympic gold medalist Satoshi Ishii, a world-class grappler, gold medalist in judo. He's got wins over UFC veterans in Jeff Monson, Pedro Hizzo, former UFC heavyweight champion Tim Sylvia. Probably not as impressive now as that resume would have sounded 10 years ago, but he's still got world-class skills. I would be very surprised if Rampage lost that fight, but in a fight anything can happen, as we've seen a million times before. But it's great news to see that Quinton Rampage Jackson will be back in a fighting arena sooner rather than later. It's excellent news. Some other fantastic news that came out of Bellator this week, and it almost falls into that too good to be true category, was Wanderlei Silva announcing that he would love to fight Kimbo Slice. I know it sounds a bit ridiculous, but that fight would be so much fun. Wanderlei is still currently suspended at the moment. He's suspended by the Nevada Athletic Commission until May of 2017, I believe. He actually did a legger when they came to his gym to drug test him, which isn't a great look, If you got nothing to hide, why run away? But, he ran away from the Athletic Commission and as a result was suspended until 2017. But he has said that when he comes back, he would love to fight Kimbo Slice. In Wanderlei's words, I've got no interest in taking it to the ground. He's planning on a slugfest, and Bellator are famous at this stage for putting on these freak show fights to just get as many eyeballs on the product as they can. And there is no doubt in my mind it would most likely be the biggest fight that Bellator has ever put on. Kimbo Slice, for one reason or another, is ratings gold. And Wanderlei Silva, make no doubt about it, is one of the greatest mixed martial arts fighters ever to compete. He was the Pride middleweight champion forever. He's got wins over Quinton Rampage Jackson in Pride. Two of the most famous fights in Pride history were Wanderlei's demolitions of Rampage Jackson. In the UFC, he picked up wins over Keith Jardine. He knocked out Brian Stann in one of the best fights ever. If you want to see two guys just going hammer and tong, Brian Stann versus Wanderlei Silva from the Saitama Super Arena in Japan, look it up. It's amazing. He's also got a win actually over current top UFC middleweight contender Michael Bisping. That fight was at UFC 110 in Sydney. It was a cracker. So it's one of those things where it could be a very, very dangerous fight for both guys, in that Wanderlei's chin is not what it used to be. He's suffered really bad knockouts at the hands of Quinton Rampage Jackson. Back in his Pride days, he got knocked out by Krokop in one of their openweight tournaments. He then got knocked out really, really badly by Dan Henderson. And with a guy as big as Kimbo that swings as hard as Kimbo does, it's not out of the question that he could really do some damage to Wanderlei if he connects. On the flip side of that, Kimbo's a well-known brawler, but as far as martial arts skills, Vanderlei is on another level. And if he shows up in Kimbo, I should say, shows up in the shape that he did against Data 5000 and he gets that tired, Vanderlei could really do some damage because he is just a beast. He's next level. His Muay Thai is ridiculous. His knees are off the charts and he is a violent human being. You don't get the nickname the Axe Murderer for no reason. So, I know that if they put that fight together, I'll be very interested to check it out. It's a real shame that we don't get the Bellator fights live in Australia. If anyone's listening that's got any stroke of the 7 people that listen to the podcast, if you've got some stroke in Bellator, get it on the telly in Australia because we'd bloody love to watch it. Vanderlei Silva, still very much a fan favourite, and it'd be amazing to see him back in there. And if he did happen to cross paths with Kimbo, it'd be a lot of eyeballs on that fight. Okay, now, so jumping back into UFC news from this week, and some of the biggest news that broke only in the last day or two is that the following season of The Ultimate Fighter, season 24, is going to be a tournament comprised entirely of flyweight fighters, with the winner to receive a world title shot at Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson. This is huge news and a massive opportunity for flyweight fighters from all over the world to throw their hand up. I was thinking about throwing my hand up to jump into the tournament. There were 2 big hurdles as far as I'm concerned. One would be that I would need to lose roughly half my body weight to make flyweight. The other hurdle, and potentially an even bigger hurdle, is the fact that I can't fight. Not a lick. So, but other than that, I've got as much chance as anyone. The winner of The Ultimate Fighter Season 24 will get a shot at the Flyweight Championship of the World. This is not the first time the UFC has used The Ultimate Fighter for this type of tournament. It was the method they used to crown their first ever UFC Women's Strawweight Champion in Carla Esparza. Back in the day, they held a fantastic season of The Ultimate Fighter. It was The Ultimate Fighter Comeback, and it was a bunch of UFC veterans were given an opportunity to give their careers a shot in the arm by competing in tournaments for shots at the Welterweight Championship of the World and the Middleweight Championship of the World, respectively. Most famously, and still regarded as most likely one of the top 2 or 3 greatest upsets in UFC history, Matt Serra won the Welterweight Championship tournament, then went on to challenge George St. Pierre and knocked him out in the first round. It was huge. On the complete other end of the spectrum, Travis Lutter won the middleweight tournament and missed weight for his title fight, so he didn't get an opportunity to fight for the belt. Still had to go in and fight Anderson Silva, though. It didn't end well. Travis was soundly defeated in a fight that ended up being for nothing. So it was a bad time to be Travis Lutter. But congratulations to any of these flyweight fighters that get an opportunity to step into this tournament and go on to fight arguably one of the best pound-for-pound fighters on the planet in Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson. It's getting very close to Mighty Mouse cleaning out the division. He's got multiple wins now over Joseph Benavidez, who's right at the top of the stack. He's got wins over Ian McCall. He's got wins over Kyoji Horiguchi. His next title defense is coming up in April, and it will be against Olympic gold medalist Henry Cejudo. If he gets past Henry, it's hard to kind of come up with a clear estimation of who's going to get that next shot at the belt. It's not to say that there aren't fighters on the roster that are potential opponents for him down the line. I mean, Justin Scoggins is definitely a fighter to keep an eye on. I think he's such a prospect in the UFC flyweight division. Zach Makovsky is another one definitely worth keeping an eye on. He's been close a couple of times. He's very, very close to putting it together. And Jussier Formiga has been one of the best flyweight fighters on the planet for a very, very long time. So he's potentially another challenger for DJ if everything falls together for him. But there's no doubt that this will definitely generate a lot of interest for the Ultimate Fighter, who are, as I say, will be their 24th season. So they're looking for ways to keep things fresh, and that's definitely a way to do it. So best of luck to all the people involved in that tournament, and hopefully we just get a cracker of a fight out of it at the end. Other news that broke this week, and it's just becoming more and more common, was the news that the UFC on Fox 19 main event had been scrapped. Tony Ferguson had been injured. I believe they found blood on his lungs, which is really concerning. But he had to withdraw from the fight. He was originally scheduled to face Khabib Nurmagomedov, who is one of the most exciting fighters on the UFC roster. He will be the lightweight champion of the world. Write it down now. Stick it in your dream journal. It's going to happen. So that was going to be such a great fight. I was really, really devastated when this fight was announced as being scrapped. But, now Khabib will get a short notice replacement opponent in Darrell Horcher, who's a young guy. He's 12-1. His only loss was to UFC veteran Felipe Nova. It's such a big ask, but to come in and fight a guy like Khabib on debut, he is next level. Khabib Nurmagomedov is really something special. He fights out of American Kickboxing Academy with the likes of Luke Rockhold, UFC middleweight champion, UFC light heavyweight champion Daniel Cormier, former UFC heavyweight champion Cain Velasquez. They've got a serious team of animals at that gym, and Khabib is top of that pile. He is so exciting to watch, just such a talented fighter, and it really is only a matter of time before he becomes the lightweight champion. I truly believe that. If you don't believe me, one of his most dominant victories in the UFC was over current UFC lightweight champion Rafael dos Anjos. So, and Khabib's been out a long time. He's suffered several injuries back to back, so I was very much looking forward to his return, and it's great news that he will stay on the card. Good luck to Daryl Horcher, because he is going to have his hands full. But once again, for the second time in 2 weeks, the UFC loses another main event due to injury. Also, huge news that came out this week, and it just keeps getting bigger and better and more massive for UFC 200. 2 massive fights announced in the last couple of days in the UFC women's bantamweight division. The first of which, former UFC title challenger Kat Zingano is going to take on Ultimate Fighter winner Juliana Pena in a very, very important fight in the UFC women's bantamweight division. And then the announcement that surprised a lot of people was that Miesha Tate would be defending her women's bantamweight championship. It would not be against Holly Holm, and it would not be against Ronda Rousey. It would instead be against Amanda Nunes. I'm pretty sure that someone on the Big Bad Brad show predicted that this fight could be next way back in episode 1. Not important who, but I think it's good. I think it freshens up the women's bantamweight division. Holly versus Ronda is still a money fight, and I think this opens up the door to give that rematch the opportunity to go down, and it could just crown the number 1 contender to take on whoever comes out the winner of Miesha Tate and Amanda Nunes. And make no mistake about it, Amanda Nunes can definitely win this fight. So I think it's very interesting. It gives the division a fresh approach, a new contender, and that can only be good news for everyone across the board. I still think the money fight at this point in time for women's MMA is Ronda versus Cyborg. I think if that fight was ever going to happen, it's got to be now. You don't want it to end up like the Pacquiao-Mayweather situation, where the fight happens 5 years after anyone stopped caring. If Cyborg gets past Leslie Smith at UFC 198, it opens the door for a fight with Ronda. Whether Ronda wants to take it or not remains to be seen. But I think this is great news for the UFC women's bantamweight division. A brand new contender in Amanda Nunes, a brand new champion in Miesha Tate. UFC 200 just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. If they add any more fights, the card's going to have to go for 2 days. But I think this is great news, and best of luck to all 4 women in their respective fights. And that brings us to this coming weekend. The UFC is finally back on the box. UFC Fight Night Croatia. The main event will see Big Ben Rothwell take on former UFC heavyweight champion Junior Dos Santos. It's going to be a fun card. It's definitely worth checking out. One fight that I'm really, really looking forward to is Nicholas Dolby taking on Zach Cummings. Dolby's last fight was a really, really entertaining draw against another up-and-comer in Darren Till. He's 14-0-1 in his career. Zach Cummins is a really, really tough fighter. He's won 5 of his last 6. His only loss was to Gunnar Nelson, who fights out of SBG with Conor McGregor and the guys in Dublin, and is really just world-class himself. So this could be a really, really fun fight. The co-main event in UFC Zagreb will be Derek Lewis taking on former UFC heavyweight title challenger Gabriel Gonzaga. Lewis is an up-and-comer. Definitely the biggest challenge of his career. He's on a 2-fight win streak at the moment, but Gonzaga's such a bogey fighter. He's one of those guys where whether he wins or loses, you're not really that surprised. It really just depends which Gonzaga shows up. He won a decision in his last fight. Prior to that, he was on a 3-fight losing streak. So he's 1-3 in his last 4. In that skid included losses to recent Bellator signee Matt Mitrione, as well as current UFC heavyweight title number 1 contender Stipe Miocic. But he's also got wins over Ben Rothwell, who is in the main event this weekend, and that most famous of head kick knockouts over Mirko Cro Cop. Gonzaga is just one of those guys. He could beat anyone on any given day, and he could go out and get smashed on any given day. It really just depends which Gonzaga shows up. But nonetheless, it's a very interesting fight in the UFC heavyweight division, and one definitely worth keeping an eye on. And speaking of the UFC heavyweight division, as I said, the main event in Zagreb this weekend will be a hugely important UFC heavyweight fight between Big Ben Rothwell and Junior Dos Santos. Ben Rothwell has been the story of the UFC heavyweight division for at least the last little while. He's on par with Mark Hunt as far as career resurgences that just came out of nowhere. In Ben Rothwell's first 5 fights in the UFC, went 3-2. And one of those losses was to our very own Mark Hunt, the Super Samoan. But then since then, he has completely flipped things on its head. He's on a 4-fight win streak at the moment. It knocked out Alistair Overeem in that run, and most recently scored a submission victory over Josh Barnett, who is one of the best submission grapplers ever to compete, not just in the UFC heavyweight division, but in mixed martial arts, full stop. And not only did Big Ben beat him, he submitted him, which was just crazy, because Josh Barnett's never been submitted in mixed martial arts competition. So as far as career trajectory taking a complete 180, it's hard not to have a smile on your face when you're talking about Ben Rothwell. I think a win here would certainly put him in the box seat to fight the winner of Stipe Miocic and UFC heavyweight champion Fabricio Verdum, provided Cain Velasquez doesn't get past Travis Brown. If Cain beats Travis, it's a lock that he will fight the winner of Stipe and Verdum. But if somehow Cain is unsuccessful against Travis Brown, then it's basically a lock that Ben Rothwell will be the next challenger for the UFC Heavyweight Championship of the world. On the other side of the spectrum is Junior Dos Santos, who at one point was the UFC Heavyweight Champion and looked like he could be the champion of the world for as long as he wanted to be champion. He was just such an exciting fighter to watch and such a dominant finisher. He kicked off his UFC career with 9 straight wins. In his UFC debut, he knocked out current world champion Fabricio Verdum in the first round. And then he went on to tear through everybody from Stefan Struve to Roy Nelson to Frank Mir, and he won the UFC Heavyweight Championship from Cain Velasquez in 64 seconds. That's how special Junior Dos Santos was when he burst onto the scene. And in recent times, he hasn't had that good of a run. He's 2-3 in his last 5 fights. He most recently got knocked out by Alistair Overeem, and he could very easily be on a 3-fight skid. His only win in his last 4 fights was a decision victory over Stipe Miocic, which really, really could have gone either way. So if he loses that fight instead of getting the nod, he's on a 3-fight skid, which, you know, even just as recently as 2 or 3 years ago would have been unheard of for a guy that was such a monster and such a dominant finisher. So it's a very, very important fight for Junior Dos Santos. Having said that, especially in a division like the heavyweight division, you're only 1 win away from turning it all around. And if he defeats Ben Rothwell this weekend, it puts him right back in the conversation for a heavyweight title fight. So there's plenty on the line this weekend in Zagreb. There's some great fights on the undercard too. Marina Moroz is on the card. We're also going to see UFC veteran Igor Pokrayats taking on Jan Blachowicz in what could be a very fun fight. And also the fights that we've discussed. If you're going to watch this one live, you're either going to have to stay up or you're going to have to set your alarm, because the Fight Pass prelims begin at 12:30 a.m. Monday morning. AM is, yes, the early one. The prelim card kicks off at 2 a.m. on Fox Sports, with the main card kicking off at 4 a.m. Monday morning. UFC Fight Night, Zagreb, Croatia. It's definitely worth having a look. So set your alarms or stay up, do what you got to do, because it's definitely going to be worth it. So with that in mind, that brings us to the end of another edition of the Big Bad Brad Show MMA. As I say every week, you've managed to find us somehow, so thanks so much. If you want to check us out, you can find us. Just search Big Bad Brad Show MMA on Facebook, or you can find us on Twitter at Big Bad Brad MMA. Thanks so much for checking out the show. I really do appreciate it, and I will catch you next time.